Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of what essentially is Battlefield Earth. Yes, we're going to continue our coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and what is now happening between Iran and Israel. Now, if you go back to my most recent content that I had produced a few days ago, I had talked about the prospects of this oncoming strike by Iran. And more importantly, I talked about just how risky this was going to be for the Iranians. Now look, separate yourself from any political issues, separate yourself from what side that you sit on in this conflict. We're just looking at the military ramifications of what could happen and what may happen. So it was thought that the Iranians would launch some sort of military strike against the Israelis. Many believed that it was going to come from an Iranian proxy, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon. Possibly missiles launched from someplace in Syria, possibly Western Iraq. Now, that didn't happen. The Iranians took it upon themselves to launch this massive attack against the Israelis, launching missiles from Iran proper. Now, this was a very, very important strike for the Iranians, as it was for the Israelis as well. It gave both sides the opportunity to truly test capabilities. It gave the Israelis the ability to test its integrated air defense network, to use the various weapon systems, the various air defense weapon systems, Patriot, the Arrow, what have you, against these inbound Iranian missile systems. And this was a multi-pronged attack by the Iranians, as you have seen on the media. The media reports that over 300 weapon systems were launched towards Israel by the Iranians. This included drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles, including some missile systems that may have not been seen before or used by the Iranians. Now, the Israelis are claiming that they had a roughly 99% interdiction rate against these Iranian missiles. Now, is that the actual number? Difficult to say. Some of the video footage that I have been able to obtain and view clearly shows that some of the Iranian missiles, drones, what have you, cruise missiles, they look like most that got through were ballistic missiles. But they did get through. Now, is it just 1%? Again, we don't know. Now, the Israelis are usually very truthful about internal casualty rates. They publicly announce casualties. They tell you their losses. They may not tell you what those losses are within the first 24 hours, but within about 48 hours, because of Israeli media and the ability to report inside of Israel, you find out pretty quickly casualties. And we know that casualties were fairly light. Now, we're going to hear then that, well, this was just a demonstration by Iran. That the Iranians were simply giving a demonstration of capability against the Israelis, and that if the Israelis were to counterattack, the Israelis would in fact incur a lot more casualties. That's ridiculous. The Iranians went after some very sensitive targets, very sensitive military targets throughout the state of Israel. This was a very large attack. This attack was about as robust as the Iranians can get. The Iranians gave the Israelis probably their best shot. The Iranians knew that they had to give the Israelis their best shot, because if the Iranians were to have used a couple of dozen weapon systems against the Israelis, the Iranians were very, very much aware that the Israelis would be able to shoot down those few dozen systems. So that's why we have seen this very, very robust, very aggressive attack by the Iranians against the Israelis, numbering more than 300 missile systems, drones, and cruise missiles. Now, unfortunately for the Iranians, the Israeli capability to shoot down these weapon systems was very much proven highly successful. The Israeli air defense network, in all probability, worked better than even the Israelis believed they could do. Now, you have to also understand that the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, all had their hand in intercepting these missile systems as well. So it wasn't just all the Israelis. Other nation states were also involved in helping the Israelis shoot these weapon systems out of the sky. Now, where does that leave Iran? Well, this leaves Iran in a very precarious situation, because Israel now knows that they can take Iran's best shot, and they can effectively interdict a lot of what the Iranians can throw at the Israelis. Now, we have not seen a direct Israeli strike yet inside of Iran. We have not seen the Israelis marshal its forces and send dozens of multi-role warplanes armed with long-range cruise missiles against targets deep inside of Iran. We have not seen Israeli F-15Is or F-35Is operate over Iranian airspace yet. We don't know what that's going to look like as of yet. Could the Iranian air defense system be very robust and prevent the Israelis from hitting targets inside of Iran? Possibly. Are they going to be as effective as the Israeli air defense network that we recently saw? Probably not. Probably not. I suspect that if the Israelis wanted to, and they had the cooperation of certain bordering nation states, then the Israelis could strike targets in Tehran with impunity. We know that Israeli F-35s have actually flown over Tehran. They have entered the country and flown over the capital. That is pretty much common knowledge as we speak. Now, how many times they've done this, it's difficult to say, but we believe at least once or twice the Israelis have put American-made F-35s over or near Tehran. Now, this is a catastrophe for the Iranians. If the Israelis are able to strike back effectively and hit targets inside of Iran with impunity or without taking very serious losses, this does not bode well for the Iranians, because again, as I talked about in the first video, the previous video, that if the Israelis are able to negate this Iranian attack, to blunt it, to disallow the Iranians to damage Israeli military sites or cause Israeli casualties, This is the only card that Iran has the ability to play outside of some sort of terrorist activity or operating through its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, which it has been doing. I would say operating through its proxies and conducting terrorist operations against the Israeli state, against the Israeli people, have been more effective than Iran's actual military capacity in terms of being able to strike targets in Israel. Because I think it's safe to say, as of right now, that the Iranian strike against the Israelis was pretty futile. They were able to hit some targets, but by and large, the Iranians were nowhere near as successful as they thought they were going to be. And that's why the Iranians played this card. And when they played this card, they played their hand. They don't have another military card to play other than the ability of its proxies to launch attacks against the Israelis. So the Israelis know right now, or the Israelis believe, that the Iranians don't have the ability to militarily launch ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, and strike targets in Israel, to hurt the Israelis through that domain. Now, the Israelis are fairly confident that they will be able to launch an operation and dramatically hurt the Iranians. Maybe not even just going after military targets that could be very well defended, but going after economic targets, going after political leadership. And the Israelis right now believe, and this is what's very ominous for the Iranians, the Israelis believe that they can now strike any target in Iran successfully and withstand any retaliation that the Iranians could launch. Now, that's not to say that the Iranians could not effectively attack other nation states in the region who do not have the type of integrated, highly advanced air defense network that the Israelis do. I would argue that the Israelis probably, right now, have the most advanced air defense network on the planet, outside of maybe some very sensitive sites in the United States. Even then, the amount of money that the U.S. spends on air defense systems in the United States is very small compared to what the Israelis spend. And obviously, spending all that money, including American money, has paid off. This was a very effective counter-operation by the Israelis to prevent the Iranians from hitting targets inside the state of Israel, including Jerusalem. Many thought that that probably wouldn't happen. The Iranians would not launch missiles towards Jerusalem, and indeed they did. But again, right now, casualty levels seem to be extraordinarily light for the Israelis. Now, we don't know how much equipment was hit. We don't know if the Iranians were successful in hitting any Israeli bunkers that contained aircraft. We just don't know as of yet. But again, indications right now are that the Israelis believe, at least, that they took the best that the Iranians could throw at them and believe now that they could strike back, and there's very little the Iranians could do outside of a proxy conflict with Hezbollah, which I think right now is more or less Israel's chief concern on how that would manifest itself, and the amount of time and military power it would take to subjugate southern Lebanon. So that's kind of where we sit for today. We will continue to monitor and report. We're going to continue to also watch what is happening in Ukraine. Obviously, the Russian offensive continues. There's talk of an uptick in Russian offensive activity against the Ukrainians. Again, as I talked about before, and this has not changed, the Ukrainians are in a very precarious situation right now. And this war looks to start changing very quickly in the favor of the Russians. We'll have more on that later, but again, thanks for joining us. More to come very, very soon. As always, have a good day.